The rain hammered against the windows of the luxury sedan as it navigated the winding mountain road. Inside, 22-year-old Isabella Chen sat in the back seat, her fingers dancing across her phone screen as she scrolled through social media posts about her latest charity gala. As the daughter of tech billionaire Richard Chen, Isabella had grown up surrounded by wealth and privilege, but unlike many of her peers, she genuinely cared about using her family's resources to help others. Her driver, Marcus, had been with the family for over a decade. He glanced in the rearview mirror, noting how Isabella's brow furrowed as she read through the comments on her foundation's latest initiative to provide scholarships for underprivileged students. "Some people just don't understand, do they, Miss Isabella?" Marcus said gently, having overheard her frustrated sigh. Isabella looked up from her phone and met his kind eyes in the mirror. "They think because I was born into money I can't possibly care about real problems. But Marcus, I've seen what poverty does to families. I've visited those neighborhoods, talked to those kids who have so much potential but no opportunities." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden, violent skidding sensation. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter as the car began to hydroplane on the rain-slicked asphalt. "Hold on, Miss Isabella," he shouted, but it was too late. The sedan spun out of control, crashed through the metal guardrail, and tumbled down the steep embankment. When Isabella regained consciousness, she found herself hanging upside down, held in place by her seatbelt. Her head throbbed and she could taste blood in her mouth. The car had come to rest against a large tree, and through the shattered windshield she could see they were far from the main road. "Marcus?" she called out weakly, but there was no response. Looking toward the front seat, her heart sank. Marcus was unconscious, and she could see blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Her phone was nowhere to be found, and even if she could locate it, she remembered there was no cell service in this remote part of the mountains. Isabella tried to unbuckle her seatbelt, but the mechanism was jammed. She was trapped, and panic began to set in. The smell of gasoline filled the air, and she could hear an ominous hissing sound coming from the engine. She knew enough about car accidents to understand that this was a dangerous situation. Miles away, in the small mountain town of Pine Ridge, 18-year-old Jake Martinez was finishing his shift at Thompson's Auto Repair. His clothes were stained with oil and grease, and his calloused hands told the story of someone who had been working since he was old enough to hold a wrench. Jake had dropped out of high school the previous year when his father had been injured in a construction accident, leaving Jake as the primary breadwinner for his family of 5. Despite his circumstances, Jake maintained an optimistic outlook on life. He sent most of his paycheck home to help support his younger siblings and his mother, keeping only enough for basic necessities. His dream of attending college and becoming an engineer seemed impossibly distant, but he held on to hope that someday things would change. As Jake walked home through the rain, he noticed an unusual orange glow coming from the valley below the main highway. Living in a small town had taught him to pay attention to details that others might miss, and something about that light didn't seem right. He squinted through the darkness and realized it looked like a fire. Without hesitation, Jake changed direction and jogged toward the highway. As he got closer, he could see tire marks on the wet pavement and a large gap in the guardrail. His heart began to race as he realized someone had gone off the road. Jake scrambled down the steep embankment, slipping on the wet leaves and rocky terrain. The closer he got to the wreckage, the more his worst fears were confirmed. The expensive-looking car was smashed against a tree, smoke rising from its crumpled hood. He could see someone moving inside. "Hey, can you hear me?" Jake called out as he approached the vehicle. Through the broken rear window, he could see a young woman hanging upside down, very much alive but clearly in distress. Isabella's eyes widened when she heard the voice. "Yes, please help us. My driver is unconscious and I can't get out." Jake quickly assessed the situation. The car was badly damaged and the smell of gasoline was getting stronger. He knew they didn't have much time before the situation became even more dangerous. The driver's side door was completely crushed, but the passenger side might be accessible. "I'm going to get you out of there," Jake said with a calm confidence that surprised even him. "What's your name?" "Isabella," she replied, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "Please hurry. I think there might be a gas leak." Jake nodded and began examining the passenger door. It was dented but not completely destroyed. He found a large rock and used it to break away the remaining glass from the window, then carefully cleared the sharp edges so Isabella wouldn't be cut during the rescue. I'm going to reach in and try to unbuckle your seatbelt, Jake explained. If that doesn't work, I have a knife that should cut through it. As Jake worked to free her, Isabella found herself studying his face in the dim light. There was something about his determined expression and gentle manner that made her feel safe despite their dangerous circumstances. This stranger was risking his own safety to help her, expecting nothing in return. What's your name? Isabella asked as Jake struggled with the stubborn seatbelt mechanism. Jake Martinez, he replied, not taking his eyes off his work. And don't worry, Isabella. I'm going to get both of you out of here safely. The sincerity in his voice and the careful way he worked to free her told Isabella everything she needed to know about Jake's character. In her world of privilege and wealth, she had met countless people who claimed to care about others but were really only interested in what they could gain. Jake was different. He was here simply because it was the right thing to do. Finally, the seatbelt gave way and Jake caught Isabella as she fell. Easy there, he said gently. Can you walk? Isabella tested her legs and found that despite some bruises and scrapes, she was largely uninjured. I think so. But what about Marcus? Jake was already moving toward the front of the car. We'll get him out too, but first let me help you get to safety. This car could catch fire at any moment. Jake helped Isabella climb out through the passenger window, supporting her weight as she navigated the broken glass and twisted metal. Once she was safely away from the vehicle, he turned his attention to Marcus. The driver was still unconscious, and his position in the front seat made the rescue much more complicated. Is he going to be okay? Isabella asked, wrapping her arms around herself as the cold mountain air cut through her torn designer dress. He's breathing, which is a good sign, Jake replied, examining the driver's door. The entire frame was crushed, making it impossible to open. I'm going to have to get him out through the windshield opening. Jake knew this was dangerous. Moving an unconscious person with potential head or spinal injuries could cause serious damage, but leaving Marcus in a car that might explode was even more dangerous. He carefully cleared away more glass and debris, creating a path large enough to extract the driver. Isabella, I need you to help me, Jake said. When I pull him out, I need you to support his head and neck. Have you ever done first aid before? Isabella shook her head. I took a basic course for my volunteer work, but I've never actually had to use it. That's okay. Just follow my lead and keep his head steady. Working together, they carefully extracted Marcus from the wreckage. Jake demonstrated remarkable strength for someone his size, and Isabella was impressed by how he seemed to know exactly what to do. They moved Marcus to a safe distance from the car just as the engine began making more alarming sounds. We need to get higher up the slope, Jake said, looking around for the best path. Can you help me carry him? Despite her designer heels being completely impractical for hiking up a rocky slope in the dark, Isabella didn't hesitate. Tell me what to do. They fashioned a makeshift stretcher using Jake's jacket and some fallen branches. The climb up the embankment was treacherous in the rain, but Jake seemed to know every rock and root on the mountainside. Isabella realized he must have grown up exploring these hills. How do you know this area so well? She asked as they paused to rest halfway up the slope. I've lived here my whole life, Jake replied, checking Marcus's pulse. My family doesn't have much money for entertainment, so I spent most of my childhood hiking these mountains. I know every trail and shortcut for miles around. When they finally reached the road, Jake immediately began flagging down passing cars. The first few vehicles drove past without stopping, their drivers apparently unwilling to stop on a dark mountain road for strangers. Isabella felt a surge of frustration at their indifference. This is ridiculous, she said. If they knew who I was, they'd stop immediately. Jake gave her a curious look. Who are you exactly? I mean, besides someone who was in a car accident. Isabella hesitated. In her world, her father's name opened every door and solved every problem. But standing here in the rain, covered in mud and glass cuts, she realized that her family's wealth meant nothing to this young man who had risked his life to save her. Just someone who's very grateful to you, she said simply. Finally, an old pickup truck pulled over. The driver was an elderly man named Pete, who recognized Jake immediately. Jake, what happened here, son? Car accident, Mr. Peterson. This man needs medical attention right away. Can you give us a ride to the hospital? Pete didn't hesitate. Of course. Load him in the back, but be careful. The ride to Pine Ridge General Hospital took 20 minutes on winding roads. Isabella sat in the truck bed with Marcus, keeping pressure on his head wound as Jake had taught her. while Jake rode up front giving Pete directions to take the smoothest route possible. At the hospital, the medical staff immediately took charge of Marcus's care. Isabella found herself sitting in the waiting room next to Jake, both of them looking like they had been through a war. Her expensive dress was ruined, her carefully styled hair was matted with mud, and she had never felt more grateful to be alive. "I don't know how to thank you," Isabella said to Jake as they waited for news about Marcus. Jake shrugged. "You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same thing." Isabella looked at him with amazement. "That's not true, Jake. 3 cars passed us on the road without stopping. Most people wouldn't have even noticed the accident, let alone climbed down to help." A nurse approached them with an update. Marcus had a concussion and would need to stay overnight for observation, but his injuries weren't life-threatening. Isabella felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Is there someone we can call for you?" the nurse asked Isabella. "Family or friends?" Isabella realized she didn't even know where her phone was, and without it, she couldn't remember a single phone number. In the age of digital contacts, she had never bothered to memorize anyone's number except her own. I don't remember anyone's number," she admitted, feeling foolish. "My phone was lost in the accident." Jake stood up. "There's a payphone by the entrance. If you can remember anyone's number, even partially, maybe we can figure it out." As they walked to the payphone, Isabella tried to think. She knew her father's office number started with the same area code as her own phone, and she vaguely remembered some of the other digits. After several attempts and with Jake's patient help, they finally reached her father's emergency line. The conversation was brief but intense. Isabella could hear her father's voice change from annoyance at being disturbed to panic when he realized what had happened. Within minutes, he was arranging for a helicopter to come get her. "My father is sending help," Isabella told Jake as they returned to the waiting room. "They'll be here within the hour." Jake nodded. "That's good. You should get those cuts looked at properly." Isabella suddenly realized that Jake had been hurt too. His hands were scraped and bleeding from breaking through the car windows, and there was a nasty cut on his forehead that he hadn't mentioned. "Jake, you're injured too. Let me get a nurse to look at you." "I'm fine," Jake said, but Isabella was already walking toward the nurse's station. "Excuse me," she said to the woman behind the desk. "My friend was hurt helping in the rescue. Could someone please take a look at him?" The nurse looked Jake over and insisted he be treated for his injuries. As they cleaned and bandaged his wounds, Isabella watched this remarkable young man who had saved her life without asking for anything in return. She learned that Jake worked at an auto repair shop and supported his entire family on his modest wages. He had dreams of becoming an engineer but couldn't afford college. He volunteered at the local fire department and helped elderly neighbors with repairs around their homes. Everything about him spoke of someone who put others before himself. "Jake," Isabella said as the nurse finished bandaging his hands, "I want to do something to thank you properly. What you did tonight. It was extraordinary." Jake looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Really, Isabella, you don't owe me anything. I'm just glad you and your driver are okay." The sound of helicopter blades filled the night air as Isabella's rescue team arrived at Pine Ridge General Hospital. Within minutes, the small mountain hospital was swarming with security personnel, medical experts, and Richard Chen himself. The billionaire tech mogul burst through the hospital doors with an entourage that made the quiet medical facility feel like a movie set. "Isabella," Richard Chen embraced his daughter, his relief evident despite his usual composed demeanor. "Thank God you're safe. When I got your call, I thought—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Isabella hugged her father back, but her eyes kept drifting to Jake, who had quietly moved to a corner of the waiting room. The contrast between her father's dramatic arrival and Jake's humble presence was striking. Here was a man who had actually saved her life, yet he seemed almost invisible next to the spectacle of wealth and power that surrounded her rescue. "Dad, there's someone I need you to meet," Isabella said, taking her father's arm and leading him toward Jake. "This is Jake Martinez. He's the one who saved my life tonight." Richard Chen was a man accustomed to sizing people up quickly. His success in business depended on his ability to read character and motivation in seconds. As he looked at Jake, he saw a young man with calloused hands, simple clothes, and an honest face. Jake stood up respectfully as they approached. "Mr. Chen," Jake said, extending his hand. "I'm glad your daughter is safe, sir." Richard shook Jake's hand, noting the firm grip and the bandages covering several cuts. "Isabella told me what you did. How you risked your life to get her and Marcus out of that car. He paused, studying Jake's face. That took real courage, son. Jake shifted uncomfortably under the intense scrutiny. Anyone would have done the same thing, sir. No, Richard said firmly. They wouldn't have. I've learned that most people talk about doing the right thing, but very few actually do it when it matters. He turned to one of his assistants. Get me Jake's information. Full name, address, everything. Isabella could see that Jake was overwhelmed by all the attention. The small hospital waiting room now felt cramped with security guards and assistants, and several staff members were sneaking glances at the famous billionaire and his daughter. Mr. Chen, Jake said quietly, I should probably get home. My family will be worried and I have work in the morning. Work? Richard's eyebrows rose. What kind of work? I'm a mechanic at Thompson's Auto Repair, Jake replied. I help support my family. Richard's expression grew thoughtful. How old are you, Jake? 18, sir. And you're not in school? Jake's jaw tightened slightly. I graduated high school early, but college isn't really an option for my family right now. We need the income. Isabella watched her father's face as he processed this information. She knew that look. Richard Chen was formulating a plan, the same expression he wore when he identified a promising investment or solved a complex business problem. Jake, Richard said, pulling out his wallet and extracting a business card. I want you to call my office tomorrow. Ask for Sarah Matthews, my personal assistant. Tell her I want to discuss some opportunities with you. Jake looked at the card uncertainly. Sir, I appreciate the gesture, but I really don't need charity. I'm doing fine on my own. This isn't charity, Richard said with a slight smile. This is business. I didn't become successful by giving handouts. I became successful by recognizing talent and character when I see it. You have both. The medical team cleared Isabella to leave after thoroughly examining her injuries. As they prepared to go, Isabella felt a strange reluctance to say goodbye to Jake. This night had changed something fundamental in her perspective, and she wasn't ready to return to her normal life and pretend it had never happened. Jake, she said as her father's security team began moving toward the exit, will you really call my father's office? Jake looked down at the business card in his hand. I don't know, Isabella. Your father seems like a good man, but our worlds are pretty different. I'm not sure I'd fit in. You saved my life tonight, Isabella said earnestly. If you can do that, you can do anything. As the helicopter lifted off from the hospital parking lot, Isabella pressed her face to the window and watched Jake walk to an old motorcycle parked near the hospital entrance. Even from the air, she could see him pause and look up at the helicopter before putting on his helmet and riding away into the darkness. The flight back to the Chen family estate took less than an hour, but it felt like traveling between two different worlds. Isabella's home was a sprawling modern mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean, with every luxury imaginable. As they landed on the private helipad, she was greeted by the household staff, her stepmother Catherine, and her younger brother David. Isabella, we were so worried, Catherine said, embracing her stepdaughter. Despite being only 8 years older than Isabella, Catherine had always treated her with genuine maternal care. Are you sure you're not seriously hurt? I'm fine, thanks to Jake, Isabella replied. Catherine, you should have seen him. He didn't hesitate for a second. He just climbed down that embankment in the dark and got us out of there. Over the next few hours, as Isabella showered, changed clothes, and had her injuries properly cleaned and dressed by the family physician, she found herself unable to stop thinking about Jake. She kept replaying the events of the evening, particularly the way Jake had worked with such calm efficiency despite the danger. Her father appeared in her room as she was finishing a light meal that the kitchen staff had prepared. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Richard asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Physically, I'm fine. But Dad, I can't stop thinking about tonight, about Jake, and about how different my life could have been if he hadn't found us. Richard nodded. I've been thinking about that too. I've also been thinking about that young man. Do you know what impressed me most about him? What? When I offered to help him, his first concern was that it might be charity. Most people in his situation would have been asking what I could do for them. He was worried about maintaining his dignity and independence, Isabella smiled. That's exactly what I thought too. He's not like anyone I've ever met. I'm going to make sure he calls my office, Richard said. A young man with his character and work ethic could go far with the right opportunities. Do you think he'll actually call? Isabella asked. Richard stood up and kissed his daughter's forehead. I don't know, but I hope he does. People like Jake Martinez are rare, and when you find them, you do everything you can to help them succeed. Meanwhile, back in Pine Ridge, Jake sat at his family's small kitchen table, staring at Richard Chen's business card. His mother, Maria, was bustling around the kitchen, preparing his lunch for the next day while simultaneously helping his youngest sister with homework. Mijo, what's that card? Maria asked in Spanish, noticing Jake's distracted expression. Jake explained the events of the evening in rapid Spanish, watching his mother's expression change from concern to amazement to pride. When he finished, Maria sat down next to him and took the business card in her weathered hands. This Mr. Chen, he wants to help you? She asked. He says it's business, not charity, Jake replied. But Mom, what if I call and it turns out to be nothing? What if I get my hopes up for nothing? Maria looked at her son with the wisdom that came from years of struggle and sacrifice. Jake, tonight you saved someone's life. You did something brave and good. Maybe this is God's way of rewarding you for your good heart. Jake's younger brother Carlos, who was 16 and still in high school, looked up from his homework. Are you crazy, Jake? This guy is like one of the richest men in the world. If he wants to help you, you should let him. It's not that simple, Carlos, Jake said. What if I don't fit in? What if I embarrass myself? Then you learn and you try again, Maria said firmly. But if you don't try at all, you'll never know what might have been possible. 3 days passed before Jake found the courage to make the call. He had been turning Richard Chen's business card over in his hands dozens of times, rehearsing what he might say, and second-guessing his decision. Finally, during his lunch break at Thompson's Auto Repair, he walked to the payphone outside the local diner and dialed the number. Chen Enterprises. Sarah Matthews speaking, came a polished voice on the other end. Hello? Jake began nervously. My name is Jake Martinez. Mr. Chen told me to call and ask for you. He said something about discussing opportunities. There was a brief pause, then Sarah's voice became warmer and more animated. Jake, Mr. Chen has been expecting your call. He's told me quite a bit about what you did for his daughter. Can you hold for just a moment while I check his schedule? Jake waited, listening to classical music and wondering if he was making a huge mistake. Within seconds, Sarah was back on the line. Jake, Mr. Chen would like to meet with you personally. Would this Saturday at 10 in the morning work for you? I can arrange transportation to bring you to our main office. Transportation? Jake asked. A car service. You shouldn't have to worry about how to get here. Mr. Chen is very interested in speaking with you about your future. Jake agreed to the meeting, though he spent the rest of the week in a state of nervous anticipation. He had never been to a major city, let alone to the headquarters of a multinational corporation. He borrowed his brother Carlos's best shirt and spent his entire savings on a decent pair of pants and shoes. Meanwhile, Isabella had been struggling to return to her normal routine. The charity galas and social events that had once felt meaningful now seemed shallow and disconnected from real life. She found herself thinking constantly about Jake and wondering whether he would take her father up on his offer. You've been different since the accident, Catherine observed as they sat by the pool on Friday afternoon. Are you sure you're okay? Isabella looked up from the book she hadn't been reading. I keep thinking about that night. About Jake and about how he lives and about how different our worlds are. Your father mentioned he offered to help the young man who saved you. Do you think that's enough? Isabella asked. I mean, Jake saved my life. He risked his own safety without knowing who I was or whether he'd get anything in return. Doesn't that deserve more than just a job offer? Catherine smiled knowingly. It sounds like this Jake made quite an impression on you. Isabella felt herself blushing. It's not like that. It's just, he was so genuine, so real. In my world, everyone has an agenda, everyone wants something. Jake didn't want anything except to help. Your father has good instincts about people, Catherine said. If he thinks Jake has potential, he probably does. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast. Jake had hardly slept, alternating between excitement and terror about the meeting. The car service that arrived to pick him up was unlike anything he had ever seen. A sleek black sedan with leather seats and tinted windows. The driver, dressed in a professional uniform, treated Jake with the same courtesy he would show any important passenger. The drive to Chen Enterprises took 2 hours, and Jake spent the time watching the landscape change from rural mountains to suburban neighborhoods to urban sprawl. and finally to the gleaming downtown district where towering skyscrapers housed some of the world's largest corporations. The Chen Enterprises building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. As Jake entered the marble lobby, he felt completely out of place among the well-dressed business people hurrying to their appointments. The security guard directed him to a special elevator that required a key card to operate. "You must be Jake," said a woman in her 40s as the elevator doors opened on the executive floor. "I'm Sarah Matthews. Mr. Chen is excited to meet with you." Sarah led Jake through a maze of corridors lined with expensive artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows, offering breathtaking views of the city. Finally, they reached a set of double doors marked with Richard Chen's name. The office inside was larger than Jake's entire house. Richard Chen stood behind a massive desk talking on the phone, but he gestured for Jake to sit in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. Jake tried not to stare at the wall of awards, photographs with world leaders and the view of the city spread out below. "Jake," Richard said as he finished his call and came around the desk to shake hands. "I'm glad you decided to call. How was the drive-in?" "It was fine, sir. Thank you for sending the car." Richard sat down across from Jake, his manner more relaxed than their first meeting at the hospital. "I've done some research since we met, Jake. I know about your family situation, your work history, and your academic record. You graduated high school 2 years early with a 4.0 GPA. You've been supporting your family since you were 16. You volunteer with the fire department and help elderly neighbors with repairs." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I don't know who you talked to, but I talked to your high school principal, your boss at the auto shop, the fire chief, and several of your neighbors." Richard interrupted with a smile. "Everyone said the same thing about you, Jake. They said you're the kind of person who always does the right thing, even when it costs you something." "I just try to help where I can," Jake said quietly. "That's exactly what I mean," Richard said, leaning forward.
"Jake, I want to offer you an opportunity that could change your life."
"I want to pay for your college education, provide a living allowance for your family while you're in school, and guarantee you a position with Chen Enterprises when you graduate." Jake stared at Richard in shock. "Sir, I don't understand. Why would you do that?" "Because talent and character are the most valuable commodities in the world, and you have both in abundance. Because my daughter is alive today because of your courage and quick thinking, and because I believe in investing in people who make the world better." "What would you expect in return?" Jake asked cautiously. "I'd expect you to work hard, graduate with excellent grades, and bring that same integrity and work ethic to Chen Enterprises that you've shown in everything else you do." Jake's mind was racing. This was beyond his wildest dreams, but it also felt almost too good to be true. "Mr. Chen, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do I know this isn't just guilt money? How do I know you won't change your mind in a year or two?" Richard smiled broadly. "That's exactly the question I hoped you'd ask. It shows you're thinking like a businessman, not just jumping at the first offer." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a legal document. "This is a contract, Jake, legally binding. It spells out exactly what I'm offering, and exactly what I expect in return. Have a lawyer look at it before you sign it." Jake took the contract with trembling hands. "I don't know any lawyers, sir. I'll provide one. Independent counsel who will work for you, not for me. I want you to fully understand what you're agreeing to." At that moment, there was a soft knock on the office door. "Come in," Richard called. To Jake's surprise, Isabella entered the room. She looked completely different from the muddy, disheveled young woman he had rescued. Her hair was perfectly styled. She wore an elegant business suit, and she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to corporate environments. Yet when she saw Jake, her face lit up with the same genuine warmth he remembered from that night. "Jake," she said, crossing the room to embrace him. "I'm so glad you came." "Isabella," Jake said, standing up awkwardly. "You look different. Better than covered in mud and glass, I hope," she laughed. "Dad told me about his offer." "What do you think?" Jake looked between father and daughter, still struggling to process what was happening. "I think I need some time to think about it. This is a lot to take in." "Of course," Richard said. "Take all the time you need. But Jake, I want you to know that this offer comes with no strings attached. You don't owe me anything beyond what's written in that contract." "There is one thing I'd like to ask," Isabella said. "Would you have lunch with me? I'd love to show you around the city and hear what you've been doing since that night." Jake hesitated. Spending time with Isabella felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical safety. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, but she was also completely out of his league. Still, the genuine friendship in her eyes made it impossible to say no. "I'd like that," he said. Isabella took Jake to a small cafe several blocks from her father's office, insisting they walk rather than take a car. "I want to show you the real city," she said, "not just the view from a corporate tower." As they walked through the bustling streets, Jake marveled at the energy and diversity around him. Street vendors sold everything from hot dogs to handmade jewelry. Musicians played on corners, and people from every walk of life hurried past with purpose. It was overwhelming but exciting. "This is one of my favorite places," Isabella said as they entered a cozy restaurant that specialized in farm-to-table cuisine. The owner, Maria Santos, started this place with nothing but a dream and incredible recipes from her grandmother. Jake noticed how Isabella greeted Maria by name and how the restaurant owner's face lit up when she saw them. "Isabella, how wonderful to see you. And you must be the young man who saved our girl's life." "News travels fast," Jake said with a slight smile. "Good news always does," Maria replied, leading them to a quiet table by the window. "Your lunch is on the house today. It's the least I can do for Isabella's hero." As they settled into their seats, Jake studied Isabella's face. Away from her father's imposing office and the corporate atmosphere, she seemed more relaxed, more like the person he had met that night in the hospital. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said after they had ordered. "Anything. That night when I was getting you out of the car, you could have told me who you were. You could have mentioned your father's name, tried to impress me or make me think I'd get some reward for helping. Why didn't you?" Isabella considered the question carefully. "Honestly, at first I was too scared to think about anything except getting out alive. But later, as we were waiting for help, I realized something. You were helping me because it was the right thing to do, not because of who my father is or what I might be able to do for you." That was refreshing. Refreshing. "Jake, I've grown up surrounded by people who want something from my family. Business partnerships, donations, social connections, job opportunities. After a while, you start to wonder if anyone actually cares about you as a person." Jake took a sip of his water, processing her words. "That must be lonely. It is sometimes. But that night, sitting in that hospital waiting room talking to you, it was the first real conversation I'd had in months, maybe years." Their food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Jake found himself relaxing despite the elegant surroundings. Isabella had a way of making him feel like they were just two regular people sharing a meal, not a billionaire's daughter and a small-town mechanic. "Tell me about your family," Isabella said eventually. Jake's face softened as he talked about his mother, his siblings, and the struggles they had faced since his father's accident. He described Carlos's dreams of becoming a doctor, his sister Elena's talent for art, and little Miguel's infectious laugh that could brighten even the darkest days. "They sound wonderful," Isabella said. "No wonder you're so determined to take care of them." "They're everything to me," Jake admitted. "That's what makes your father's offer so complicated. It's an incredible opportunity, but it would mean leaving them for 4 years. What if something happens while I'm away? What if Carlos needs help with school, or Elena needs art supplies, or Miguel gets sick?" Isabella leaned forward. "Jake, have you considered that getting an education might be the best way to help them in the long run? With a degree from a top university and a position at Chen Enterprises, you'd be able to provide for your family in ways you never could as a mechanic." "I know you're right," Jake sighed. "It's just hard to think long-term when there are immediate needs right in front of you." After lunch, Isabella insisted on showing Jake more of the city. They visited a science museum where Jake's eyes lit up as he examined the engineering exhibits. His questions about robotics and sustainable technology impressed the museum staff, and Isabella could see the brilliant mind her father had recognized. "You really love this stuff, don't you?" Isabella observed as Jake studied a display about renewable energy systems. "I've always been fascinated by how things work," Jake said. "When I was a kid, I used to take apart old electronics just to see how they were built. My mom got so frustrated when I couldn't put them back together. And now I can fix almost anything with an engine," Jake said with pride. "But I've always dreamed of designing new things, not just repairing old ones." As the afternoon progressed, Isabella found herself more and more impressed by Jake's intelligence, curiosity, and genuine kindness. When an elderly man dropped his walking cane on the museum steps, Jake immediately stopped to help him. When a lost child in the museum couldn't find her parents, Jake calmly helped locate them while keeping the little girl entertained with jokes. "You have a gift," Isabella told him as they walked through the museum's gardens. "What kind of gift?" "You make people feel safe. You have this natural ability to stay calm in difficult situations and help others do the same. That's rare, Jake." As evening approached, Isabella suggested they have dinner at her favorite restaurant before Jake's ride back to Pine Ridge arrived. The restaurant was more upscale than the cafe where they'd had lunch, and Jake felt self-conscious about his borrowed clothes. "Don't worry about the dress code," Isabella said, noticing his discomfort. "You look fine. Besides, I know the owner here too." Over dinner, their conversation deepened. Isabella shared her own struggles with finding purpose and meaning beyond her family's wealth. She talked about her foundation work and her desire to make a real difference in the world. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just playing at helping people," she confessed. "Writing checks, attending galas, making speeches. But what you did that night, that was real help. That changed everything." "Your foundation work is important too," Jake said. "Those scholarships you provide, they change people's lives. You just don't get to see the immediate results the way I did that night." "Maybe," Isabella said, "but I want to do more. I want to get my hands dirty, work directly with people who need help." "So do it," Jake said simply. "Use your resources, but also use your time and energy. Get involved personally," Isabella smiled. "You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe we make things more complicated than they need to be." As they finished dinner, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from the driver letting him know the car was waiting outside. The magical day was coming to an end, and Jake felt a strange reluctance to leave. "Isabella," he said as they walked toward the restaurant's exit, "thank you for today. This was incredible. Thank you for giving me a chance to show you around. Jake, I hope you'll seriously consider my father's offer. I think you could do amazing things with that opportunity." "I will consider it. I promise." They stood outside the restaurant for a moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. Finally, Isabella stepped forward and hugged him. "Whatever you decide," she said. "I want you to know that meeting you changed something for me. You reminded me what real courage and kindness look like." As Jake settled into the back seat of the sedan for the drive home, he watched Isabella wave goodbye through the rear window. His mind was spinning with everything he had experienced that day. The corporate meeting, the contract offer, the museum, the conversations, and most of all, the growing connection he felt with Isabella. During the 2-hour drive back to Pine Ridge, Jake stared out at the passing landscape and tried to imagine his life taking such a dramatically different path. College, a corporate career, financial security for his family. It all seemed like a dream. But as the city lights faded and the familiar mountains came into view, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the most significant part of the day hadn't been Richard Chen's generous offer. It had been the hours spent with Isabella, discovering that despite their different backgrounds, they shared similar values and dreams. When Jake arrived home, his family was waiting up for him, eager to hear about his day. As he described the meeting with Richard Chen and the incredible opportunity that had been offered, he could see the excitement and hope in their faces. "Mijo," his mother said, tears in her eyes, "this is the answer to our prayers." But even as his family celebrated this potential change in their fortunes, Jake found his thoughts drifting back to Isabella's smile, her genuine interest in his ideas, and the way she had made him feel like anything was possible. 2 weeks after his visit to Chen Enterprises, Jake made his decision. He had spent countless hours reviewing the contract with the independent lawyer Richard Chen had provided, discussing the opportunity with his family, and wrestling with his own doubts and fears. Finally, sitting in his family's small living room with his mother, siblings, and the signed contract in front of him, Jake knew what he had to do. "I'm going to accept Mr. Chen's offer," he announced. The room erupted in celebration. Carlos whooped with joy. Elena hugged him tightly, and little Miguel asked if this meant they would be rich. Maria Martinez wiped tears from her eyes as she embraced her eldest son. "I'm so proud of you, mijo," she whispered. "Your father would be proud too." Jake called Richard Chen's office the next morning to confirm his acceptance. Sarah Matthews scheduled a meeting for the following week to finalize the details and begin the enrollment process for the fall semester at Stanford University, where Jake would study engineering with a focus on sustainable technology. When Jake arrived at Chen Enterprises for his second visit, he felt more confident than he had 2 weeks earlier. The security guards recognized him, Sarah greeted him like an old friend, and even the imposing corporate atmosphere seemed less intimidating. "Congratulations, Jake," Richard Chen said as they shook hands in his office. "I think you're making the right choice, and I'm excited to see what you accomplish." They spent an hour going over the details of the arrangement. Jake would receive full tuition, room and board, plus a generous living allowance to send home to his family. In return, he would work at Chen Enterprises during summer breaks and commit to joining the company full-time after graduation. "There's one more thing," Richard said as they finished the paperwork. "Isabella has been working on a special project and she specifically requested that you be involved. She's starting a new initiative within our foundation that focuses on hands-on community development, rather than just funding. She thinks your perspective would be valuable." Before Jake could respond, Isabella appeared in the doorway. "Dad, is it okay if I steal Jake for a few minutes?" "Of course. I think we're finished here anyway." Isabella led Jake to a conference room where the walls were covered with charts, photographs, and planning documents. "Welcome to Project Bridge," she said with obvious excitement. "Project Bridge? The idea is to create bridges between communities that need help and resources that can provide it. But instead of just writing checks, we want to create sustainable, long-term partnerships. We want to train local people to become leaders and problem solvers in their own communities." Jake studied the materials on the walls. There were maps showing rural communities without reliable internet access, urban neighborhoods lacking adequate health care, and schools in need of STEM education programs. "This is incredible, Isabella. But why do you want me involved?" "I don't know anything about running a foundation." "That's exactly why I want you involved," Isabella said. "You understand what it's like to live in a community that's been overlooked. You know how to solve problems with limited resources, and you have credibility with people who might be suspicious of outsiders trying to help." Over the next hour, Isabella outlined her vision for Project Bridge. The first initiative would focus on bringing technology education and internet access to rural communities like Pine Ridge. They would train local residents to become technology coordinators, create mobile learning labs, and establish partnerships with universities for ongoing support. "Pine Ridge would be our pilot community," Isabella explained. "We'd start there, learn what works and what doesn't, then expand to other similar communities." Jake was amazed by the thoroughness of Isabella's planning and the genuine respect she showed for the communities she wanted to help. "This wasn't charity. It was partnership. I love it," Jake said finally. "But I have one suggestion." "What's that?" "Don't just focus on technology. These communities need help with a lot of things. Healthcare access, financial literacy, small business development, renewable energy. If you're really building bridges, make them strong enough to carry all kinds of support." Isabella's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. A comprehensive approach rather than just focusing on one area." They spent the rest of the afternoon refining the project plan. Jake suggested specific people in Pine Ridge who could serve as community coordinators, identified potential locations for learning centers, and helped Isabella understand the cultural considerations that would be important for the project's success. As they worked together, Jake found himself increasingly impressed by Isabella's intelligence, dedication, and genuine desire to make a difference. She asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully to his suggestions, and treated him as an equal partner rather than just an advisor. "Isabella," Jake said as they wrapped up their planning session, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why is this so important to you?" "I mean, you could have a comfortable life without getting involved in all this messy, complicated work." Isabella was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day we had lunch? About making things more complicated than they need to be?" Jake nodded. "I've been thinking about that ever since. I realized that I was making my life complicated by trying to find meaning in the wrong places. I was looking for purpose in galas and charity events and board meetings, when the real purpose was right in front of me all along. Which is using whatever advantages I have to help people who haven't had the same opportunities, but doing it in a way that respects their dignity and builds their capacity to help themselves." Jake smiled. "That sounds like something my mother would say." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She is. She also says that good things happen when good people work together. Isabella stood up and extended her hand to Jake. Partners? Jake shook her hand, feeling a spark of electricity at the contact. Partners. Over the next few months, as Jake prepared for his freshman year at Stanford, he and Isabella worked closely on developing Project Bridge. They traveled to Pine Ridge together several times, meeting with community leaders, identifying potential sites for the Learning Center, and beginning to build the relationships that would be crucial to the project's success. Jake's family was amazed by the changes in their lives. The financial pressure that had been constant for years was suddenly lifted. Carlos was able to focus on his studies without worrying about finding a part-time job. Elena received art supplies and lessons. Miguel got the medical attention he needed for his asthma. But perhaps the most significant change was in Jake himself. Working with Isabella on Project Bridge had awakened a passion for social innovation that complemented his love of engineering. He began to see how technology could be used not just to create cool gadgets, but to solve real problems for real people. "You've changed," Carlos observed one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching the sunset over the mountains. "How so?" "You seem bigger somehow, like you can see possibilities that weren't there before." Jake knew what his brother meant. Meeting Isabella and her father, seeing how successful people thought about problems and solutions, working on Project Bridge, all of it had expanded his vision of what was possible. The night before Jake left for Stanford, Isabella called to wish him luck. They had spoken regularly over the past few months, but this conversation felt different. "I'm going to miss working with you," Isabella said. "It won't be the same developing Project Bridge without your input." "You'll do great," Jake assured her. "Besides, I'll be back for Christmas break and we can work on expanding to the next community." "Jake," Isabella said after a moment of silence, "I want you to know that meeting you changed my life. Not just because of what you did that night, but because of who you are. You showed me what authentic leadership looks like." "Isabella," Jake replied, his voice softer than usual, "you changed my life too. You helped me see that I could dream bigger than I ever imagined." Neither of them spoke for a moment, both sensing that there were deeper feelings neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "Good luck at Stanford," Isabella said finally. "Thank you for everything." As Jake hung up the phone and looked around his childhood bedroom one last time, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that rainy night, when he had climbed down an embankment to help strangers. He had gained not just an education and career opportunity, but a sense of purpose and a partnership with someone who shared his values. Tomorrow he would begin the next chapter of his life, but he would carry with him the lessons he had learned about courage, kindness, and the power of two people working together to make the world a little better. Jake Martinez had started as a poor boy whose brave act shocked everyone. Now he was becoming something even more remarkable. A young man with the vision, skills, and partnerships needed to create lasting change. And while he didn't know exactly what the future held, he knew it would be built on the foundation of that one night when doing the right thing had changed everything.